Hello, everybody. I'm Jonathan Uresco. I'm an implementation engineer here at Jamf, and I am very, 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 very excited to talk about automation. I love saving myself time when I was an IT admin. I basically had to code myself another employee into an existence, and I'm sure we all could love that. There's a lot of tasks that we automate or would like to automate and would like to be able to not necessarily do over and over and over again. So we're going to talk about the methods on how to do that and how to use Jamf along with APIs and webhooks to do so. So we're going to be talking about the classic API for now, because that's what we're currently using in a large amount of our customers. And that's kind of where you're going to have a good baseline to start. We're going to dive into what is a webhook. We're going to dive into kind of how to start automating things, what it means to integrate Jamf Pro into something else, and then we're going to piece it all together and see if we can actually make some real-life, in-place workflows. I'm not going to be standing at a keyboard typing, and this is a curl script, this is a command, and I'm going to hit enter. You don't have to do any of that. There's not going to be any of that. That is all actually on developer.jamf.com. There's a ton of code snippets, and there's a ton of good how-tos on how to do basically what I talk about using the Jamf Pro API, along with a whole slew of resources on webhooks. But before I get going, can I get a show of hands of who has any familiarity using command line API? Well, I'm done. Okay. No, I'm just kidding. I'm no expert. I just like getting things done and saving myself time. What about webhooks? Can I get a show of hands for webhooks? Okay, a little less. I feel a lot more comfortable. Whew. All right, cool. Who here uses Jamf Pro? There we go. Look at all the resources you have in the room to help make your stuff that you do over and over and over again, make it as easy as it can be for yourself. So first, we're just going to go a brief introduction on what actually is an API. And an API is, in terms of Jamf Pro, allows you to manipulate things or values or fields inside of Jamf Pro using some sort of command line. That may be in like terminal, or that may be some sort of, say, automator type server or software that you can upload your scripts or your applications to manipulate data for you. Now, a get would be able to gather information that you want from Jamf Pro. If you do go to that URL, which is your URL/API, the Jamf Pro API, you'll be able to see all of the different endpoints or different things you'll be able to get information on. Post allows you to submit via XML a brand new record into Jamf. So you could potentially pre-populate computers into Jamf Pro. You can add new departments or buildings or things like that into Jamf Pro, or a lot of our favorites are uploading a bunch of asset tags, which would actually be under put. So updating a record, if you already have a computer in inventory and you want to submit some sort of other attribute to that computer record, the put instance is going to allow you to add some sort of value to some sort of existing record that's already in Jamf. Some of you may have used or seen a tool out there called Mutt. It is an open source tool out there, not made by Jamf, but it's made by a Jamf. And that uses a ton of different resources in Jamf API endpoints to put a slew of information from, say, a CSV or some sort of data source up into Jamf. And then finally, and the scariest one of all, potentially, is delete. And delete is going to do exactly what it sounds like. It is going to remove a record. If you remove a record from Jamf, hopefully you have some sort of backup of your server in case you need to audit or get some data from it. But deleting is generally going to do what it sounds like. It'll remove it completely. So once we have those basics, we can talk a little bit of how it works. So using the command line, you're going to have some sort of curl if you're going to use that kind of binary, or some sort of binary if you're using Bash or Python. Any scripting could work just fine. You're going to make that request, whether that request is a get, a post, a put, or a delete, using your Jamf Pro credentials. Not just anyone can submit one line through any command line interface and delete every single computer in your Jamf Pro instance. You're going to have a bad time if that was a thing. So instead, you have to have some sort of auth, and we're moving auth into the new Jamf Pro API as time goes on. Once you do that, you'll get back some sort of response, and that kind of response can have whatever it is that you're looking to get from your server. So if it's a get, which is gather information, you'll get back some sort of XML or JSON response. And then once you have that information, then you can do something, whether that's parse that information and fire off another kind of updater or have it look into some other database. That would be kind of an integration. Look into some other database to gather information and shoot it back into Jamf. One of the big ones out there is kind of a ServiceNow type integration, where your ServiceNow would have a lot of your assets and a lot of information in there, or ticketing system, and you want to gather information from that ServiceNow into Jamf Pro, and vice versa, and have them communicate. You can do that all on the back end using a command line interface with the API. This is the screen I was talking about earlier, that if you do go to your URL/API, you'll get to the classic API reference. All of these slash and then some sort of string is going to be that endpoint that we can gather information on, and it shows you what your options are as you go through the API resource page. So for accounts, you can add or get accounts. You can add different computers, mobile devices, so on and so forth. The list is very extensive, so feel free if you have time. Go ahead and scroll through that API just to see what options there are. You can do anything from sending remote commands to a whole slew of iPads even. Or if you want to get all iPads up to a certain iOS, go ahead and use the API to just ping a whole smart computer group or a whole group of devices and just send that command via the command line interface. You don't have to interact with Jamf Pro, the web interface itself. The command itself looks a little bit like this. You have your binary. You're looking to get, in this case, some sort of auth, and then your URL. The URL is going to, in this case, look up computers with the URL ID or the JSS ID of 1, so the first JSS or Jamf Pro record for that computer, and then you're going to get some sort of response. This response is going to be in XML. You can also get it in JSON if you'd like, but it's going to have a whole slew of attributes. If you want to change any of these attributes, you absolutely can. So in which case I talked about earlier, updating asset tags. To update that asset tag, if you want to, you can go ahead and concoct or put together some sort of blob of data that the way it will look inside of Jamf. So inside of the response that you got when your initial get, it did show asset tag, and asset tag would probably be blank if you had not had that computer asset tagged prior. So what you can do in this case, we are going to update the asset tag to asset tag 1000, and we're going to add or associate or assign that computer to new employee 1. This is our data. We can put this data into the command. So we have our same curl command at the top, and it's gathering that information. It's going to shoot that up to Jamf, and it'll change that in the record. This is a very basic way to manipulate data without actually touching a web interface. Do it all on command. Have a bunch of scripts waiting on your desktop to do this type thing, or use some sort of GUI interface like Mutt in order to update a lot of different records. Now, onto my best friend, a webhook. A webhook, for those that are not familiar, will take some sort of event in Jamf Pro, and based on whatever event happens, gather information around that event and fire it off. But where does it fire it off to? It fires off to either a webhook catcher or a webhook server. A webhook server is just some sort of server waiting anywhere. You could host it yourself, or my favorite one, and disclaimer, this is not sponsored by them at all, Zapier. Zapier is a cloud-based webhook server, webhook catcher, kind of similar to like an if this then that type scenario, but much more robust. You can have it be more almost enterprise grade, run a bunch more tasks like that. The webhook itself, you have to go into Jamf Pro and say, in Jamf, hey, every time a new computer enrolls, I want a webhook to trigger. That's in just the webhook section under settings. You're going to grab a webhook link from your webhook catcher that the Jamf Pro will know to send that data that once the computer enrolls, where it's going to shoot that information off to. And then there's going to be some sort of webhook in the cloud, whether it's a Zapier or whether you're hosting it yourself, either one's fine, that's constantly looking for any data to come in using that link. In Jamf, it looks a little bit like this. So you have whatever you want to call this particular webhook instance. You can have a whole slew of webhooks happen. Automate all the things. That's what's great about Jamf. The webhook URL is going to be the URL of your webhook catcher, and that webhook catcher can have a bunch of different actions that are waiting for certain webhook events. You can have authentication if your webhook catcher does require it, and then you can send the information as either XML or JSON. The very bottom, that webhook event, computer added, would be that enrolled. So a new record is created inside of Jamf, and then it's going to send whatever information that gets bundled up, whether it's user information or hardware information or software information, whatever it is that you get in there, it's going to shoot it all off onto the webhook server. Great. Now my webhook server has a bunch of data. Now what? All that data is pretty valuable. So on the back end, on the webhook server, it's looking for all that information, but that webhook server is not just looking for data. It's going to do something with that data. It can parse the data, it can gather certain fields or variables from that data, and then it can take those fields and maybe concoct it into one of those data sets like I did earlier with that asset tag thing, and then send something right back to Jamf without an IT admin actually doing anything. Computer enrolled, reached out to, submitted that webhook out to the webhook server. The webhook server is running some sort of script looking through a CSV of a bunch of serial numbers and asset tags, gathers that asset tag, bundles it up into the necessary put command, and fires that off right back to Jamf, updates that asset tag. I didn't have to type in any asset tag. It did it all for me. Who likes doing repetitive tasks over and over again? The same number of people put your hand down. Another cool thing you can do is automate more complex tasks. Like, yes, you can definitely update all the asset tags to your heart's content. You absolutely can. But there's a lot of other tasks that we do as IT admins that can be pretty darn tedious. For instance, onboarding. When you're onboarding a new employee, that employee signs some paperwork, and that paperwork goes into HR, and HR adds that information into some sort of record, whether it's a Workday type thing, whether it's an AD type thing. Workday or Namely, those are two kind of more complex, modernized HR environments. Generally, an email is sent to IT telling them, hey, we have a new employee. We don't know who that new employee is, but we have a new employee. So IT has to look up that user in Workday or Namely, and we're going to find a lot of information. We have to look up their department. We have to determine what kind of device they need. If they're finance, they're not going to maybe necessarily get a 15-inch MacBook Pro with all the fancy things. We have to find that. We have to find the device in inventory. We have a big stock of computers. What could they possibly want? We then have to wipe the device. And then we have to tell Jamf Pro whose computers this is going to get, all this stuff. But wait, there's more. We still have to assign the device in Jamf Pro, and then we have to manually create 12 different SaaS accounts, their Google account, their Slack account, their all the different accounts. Whatever accounts you have to do. Gets really annoying. And then you have to quadruple check that you didn't improperly assign someone to the wrong manager, or you didn't set someone as a CEO when you already have a CEO. You got to make sure that everything's in the right place, and that gets very, very annoying. I didn't like doing that. At some environments that I see, the IT people have to onboard sometimes 10 people a week, and IT people are humans, so they like to sleep on the weekends. So why do all of those things when we can have an automated process do that all for you? So what would that look like at a very, very high level? New employee joins company. HR inputs that information into Namely. Email gets sent to IT to get the tech ready. IT delivers that device to the new employee. And that's it. You can definitely do that. All of those tools out there, whether you're using AD, whether you're using Azure, whether you're using the Namely, the Workdays, all of those tools have APIs. A whole slew of them do. But how is that only possible in 4 steps? Everything that I mentioned earlier, all those other 12 steps, 13 steps, can all be automated in some way, whether it's a script or whether it's some sort of webhook or a combination of the two to create accounts in all the different SaaS apps. Now, I know there are a bunch of different apps out there that do not have APIs. Email those developers and email those support people to get APIs so you don't have to waste your time creating all those accounts. You can do that, and people do it. And organizations will listen to you. It got to the point where I didn't have to do any manual creation of SaaS accounts, and the organizations listened when I reached out. All of that can be done via webhooks and APIs. All of those different steps that I had can be pieced out individually and then bundled up and sit either like on a local server if it's very sensitive information or some sort of sensitive password that you need to have, or in some sort of webhook type instance, and then you break it down. The trigger in terms of onboarding would be that HR person typing in the information into the Workday or the Namely or the AD system. You'd have something monitoring that. Now, Workday and Namely both have APIs that you can have a monitor constantly sending information, whether it's kind of like a Splunk type deal, gathering information ad nauseum, seeing if anything new changes. Once it has that new change, it can then initiate the process. That process would then gather information of whatever that new person that started, that new employee, find out what their department is, find out who their managers are, find out who their reports are, gather all that information and sort on the back end using scripts where they fall into the organization. A webhook server is going to run a bunch of different API commands, a bunch of different scripts, whether it's creating Google SaaS accounts or whether it's creating your Slack account, like I mentioned, Adobe, allocating licenses. All of those kind of things can all be done via scripts and APIs. Those are all just sitting on either a webhook server, again, or if you want to have it locally on your computer, you can do that too. Data gets manipulated on the back end, and then it creates new records if necessary. And then other actions, whether it's allocating proper applications or adding computers to smart groups, or static groups, or whatever groupings you have inside of Jamf Pro, it can do all of those things for you. My guess is a lot of you use these tools, or at least some of these tools, in which case you have no excuse to waste time continuing to do these monotonous tasks. Again, this is not sponsored by any of these. These are just tools that I've used in the past and I've seen customers use in order to automate all of the things. So we'll dive a little bit deeper. So that HR employee adds the information into Namely. You have a monitor running, sometimes maybe either with Splunk or one of these other integrations, seeing if anything changes. That information, once something changes, will shoot off a webhook into Zapier. Zapier is that webhook catcher, webhook server thing that I talked about earlier, and Zapier can do a whole slew of things, whether it's taking that information, running some sort of script to create accounts, delete accounts, manipulate accounts, send commands down. You can also integrate it with other different apps or tools. You can do that all based in Zapier. There's even a bunch of information and a bunch of integrations that you don't necessarily have to code out yourself. They already have little kind of like plugins that you can add, or zaps as they call them, to have a bunch of things happen all at once. You don't have to be a hefty coder to do it. That new information is gathered and then the automations happen. So that's all in step 2. Step 3, that email that gets sent to IT, the email has already been created for the end user because the webhook has done all that for you. It created the webhook, created the email address, it sent the email address to the end user's personal email address with some sort of probably temporary password. Or if you're in an environment that you want to print out the email and password, temporary password, you definitely can, and hand that to the end user when they get their computer for the first time. New employee data is gathered on the back end again, and then the automations happen, whether that's scoping out specific applications or settings or scripts or whatever it is that the end user needs specific to that end user. The whole point of this is to make it as specific to the end user as possible. You can definitely deploy a base provisioning setup to all the computers in your environment, but that's not necessarily the best experience for the end user. So all of these different options are available. And there's a bunch of different examples out there on how to automate things. So an email is created and gathered from HR. Sure, temporary password is created with that information that's gathered. It's going to create all the SaaS accounts you want. It's going to find available on computers either in your inventory or ServiceNow, or potentially could even create a PO and get that sent off to your rep, your reseller or whatever to get your device. Smart computer groups can update based on that new employee that does get registered. End user boots up the computer, hopefully they're DEP'd. And then their computer provisions automatically. And then at the end, some sort of maybe an extension attribute is waiting for some sort of file to be plopped down the computer to tell IT that that computer is now provisioned. IT did one thing. IT physically had to take the computer and give it to the end user, whether that's mail, plop it on their desk, or whatever. IT doesn't necessarily even have to do that. You can have the HR person do it. If you have a remote office where you don't have a local IT person, have whoever, office manager, whoever manages it, go ahead and grab it from their inventory and plop it on their desk. There's a whole slew of information out there. There's another presentation that I was a part of 2 days ago that helped with automating your erase and install, kind of like you would with an iPad, that erase and install or set up, erase all content and settings on an iPad. You can do that same workflow on a Mac. All of it can be automated. Bear with me. You have 3 players in the game. You got your IT admin, that's you. You have your end user, that's the desired end user. And then you have HR. For those that are visual out there, this helps me, but by the end of it, you have to pay attention now. So don't leave the room and don't come back. HR adds the user information into some sort of record, whether that's AD or your Namely thing. You have a webhook constantly monitoring that database, that directory, and then once it finds something new, it's going to send an email out to some sort of catcher, maybe some sort of email address or some sort of new hire at something.com, which a webhook is looking for. If a webhook then sees that new information in there, all that information, it can then create all the things at once. It can create a new record in Jamf. It can create their Cisco account, their Slack account, their Google Apps account, their Adobe accounts, their Office 365 accounts, all of the things, and send that end user that email address and the temporary password. Jamf now had some sort of thing happen to it. It had a new computer in record. It finds a computer that it may necessarily need to provision or erase or do whatever it needs to do. Once it's done erasing, this is the only part the IT admin has to do. You have to grab the computer. Once you grab the computer, you can then hand that computer to the end user. The end user now has pretty much all the resources they need. They have their account, so whether it's an LDAP account for logging in with the EP, or just the basic account if they're going to be local admins. So they're going to take that computer, they're going to turn it on. Once they turn on the computer, they're going to be authenticating. They're going to authenticate with their LDAP or AD, create that local account. The computer is DEP'd, hopefully. If not, there's some sort of enrollment looking there. It enrolls in Jamf. Jamf is now going to send off a webhook. Once it does send off the webhook, it is going to, A, provision that computer. That's why you see one arrow going back down to the computer. And then it's also going to send a webhook out to potentially, maybe you have some sort of other inventory system that you have to tell that this computer is now assigned to this user. So that's a ServiceNow type thing. I'm going to say that's HR. It may not necessarily be HR, but it's going to send that over to HR. Whatever information that after the computer provisions or whatever the end user now has on their computer, it's going to fire that off to HR, let them know that everything's good. Because you do have to let them know that you did get the computer ready, even though if all you did is just physically take the computer and give it to the end user. And the end user is going to be nice and happy because they have a completely imaged computer or provisioned computer, and you're going to be happy. That's the end goal. Happy IT admins. Happy IT admin. Happy end user is a happy IT admin. Another workflow could be maybe automating your ticketing system. The end user submits a ticket without automation. The end user submits a ticket via Slack or Zendesk or email or Jira or whatever you're using. IT admin has to read that message. IT admin has to say something like, "We're on it." Now, I see sometimes there's some sort of automation in the back end that's already doing that part for you. Great, you're one step of the way there. IT admin then figures out the best solution, does maybe some sort of research, or figures out what the workflow is to best provide. They test that said resolution. They provide that resolution to the user, and then you close the ticket. Or, if you automate that, any user submits a ticket, notification to IT says the issue's resolved. There is no step 3. It's not a unicorn. You can definitely do this. I did this all the time as an IT admin. I don't want to do work. That's a lie. I want to do work, but I want to do cool work. I don't want to continuously reset passwords. I don't want to continually have to scope something in Jamf to have my end user get the app. If they want an app, they can request it and they'll get it. Or they'll go through some sort of process that has to kind of whatever requests and approval is needed. You can definitely do that all on the back end and make it automated. Let's define this a little bit, because I know this is kind of like, okay, cool. Yeah, I get it, John. You're going to have some sort of monitoring system, whether that is a webhook or whether that's some email filter. Filter whatever comes in, and you can get good with some buzzwords, whether that's email reset or password reset or PW reset, anything along those lines, or new app or app request or something along those lines. And then you're going to filter those, and they're going to be bundled up into some sort of separate folder. From there, you can take whatever the information that is gathered in there, whatever folder it popped into, and have some sort of automation. You know who it came from. They can't send an email to you from some rando email account or from some rando Slack account. You know who it came from, so you have who gets it. You have now what they need done. Now we can automate using all of the different tools and APIs out there to get that thing accomplished. So some additional IT ticketing type things. So an automated email sent to the user, let them know the ticket was received. That's going to be done via webhook. Some sort of message parser, whether that's a webhook or API or just blatant Gmail or Office 365 is looking for certain buzzwords or keywords. You have some sort of script. So for instance, you can have some sort of script automate, gather the information of that computer or who actually has that computer by username. You can put information or put whatever application that end user requested in Jamf. Add them to some sort of list for scoping. You can reset passwords. I don't like resetting passwords. They can do it themselves. Sure, go ahead and reset passwords. If you absolutely want to, which I kind of like to do, monitor how many times they needed a password reset, then you can have a conversation. Hopefully they are adults at your companies. They can remember some sort of password. But if they can't, you just want to keep that notified and be like, hey, manager over here, employee X is lacking on the password remembering. New equipment approval, sure, automate all that as well. There's a whole slew of things you can automate. There's no end to automation. So let's take a look into it. So for this instance, we're going to talk about password resets. Password reset. 2 players, end user, IT admin. The end user is going to submit a ticket. The ticketing system could be whatever. In this case, we're going to say it's an email. They send an email, hey, via their personal email, password's not working, something along those lines, or someone else is saying their password's not working. That's going to fire off some sort of webhook, or there's some sort of webhook, or there's some sort of server monitoring that particular email account. It's going to gather whatever information is necessary, and then it's going to shoot that information up to the servers. It's going to shoot it to Gmail to actually send the password reset to the end user, and it's going to send an information to Jamf telling that end user, or telling Jamf that that end user did in fact ask for a password reset. So you can have some sort of tally under password number of password resets and say, hey, how many password reset? If more than, or if whatever it is, add 1 to it. You can do that via the Jamf API. And then you have to send the end user that actual password, and you did nothing. It's great. You can do that. It's fantastic. I'm going to do one more. App requests. 3 players. You have that decision maker in there. The decision maker could be finance. The decision maker could be their manager. Whoever it is, they need to approve that said app, which probably costs money. They need to say that end user is allowed to get that app. The end user submits a ticket, which generates some sort of webhook that does some sort of automation looking for, oh, hey, this person requested the Adobe Creative Cloud. It's going to first send its own email out to the decision maker. The decision maker is going to say yes or no. Hopefully they say yes because they're a nice decision maker, which is going to send off an email, which is going to be some sort of response. And that email is going to go to some sort of other webhook that's looking for whatever their response was, whether it was a yes or a no. In this case, it's a yes because they're a nice IT admin. That is going to then send information to both Jamf and Adobe. Adobe is going to create that account for the end user, give them the license they need via API, which you can do. And it's going to tell Jamf, hey, Jamf, go ahead and make this app or Creative Cloud or whatever it is available in self-service to the end user. The end user gets both of those things because they're going to get self-service, which they already have on their computer, and they're going to get that temporary password for their Adobe account to get activated. And again, what did the IT admin do? Literally nothing. Literally nothing. Now, all of these workflows have already been done, and you can go on Jamf Nation, you can go on GitHub. I've done a couple things on my personal GitHub, on professional services GitHub that has a bunch of different automations. I'm all about automations. There's a blog post I put out a little bit ago called "Imaging is Dead, Now What?" There's a whole, that kind of phrase, "Imaging is dead, now what?" has been very well used across the entire Mac community. My particular version walks through why it changed, the method to adjust your imaging into provisioning, and I have some automations up there to make your lives entirely more simple, so you don't have to worry about breaking down, creating that monolithic image into individual policies, which potentially may be necessary for the new provisioning. So always, 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 always try to automate all the things. Any questions? Again, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. There's microphones across the stage, but if you ask, can I do this, I'm probably going to say yes.
Well, good. I got a can you do this?
Sure.
One thing that I spend a lot of time doing is managing my pre-stages.
Okay.
Because I have 23 schools and we move devices around and I use pre-stages to set my locations.
Sure.
Is there a way that I can not have to go into that pre-stage and go click, 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 click?
Click all those buttons. Yes.
Yes.
So in Jamf Pro as it sits now, there's no API to add those to the pre-stage. However, you can add all to the pre-stage and have some sort of scoping either via AD, LDAP, or some sort of other record that knows who's going to have that computer, whoever gets assigned the computer to scope to other, whatever deployments you're looking to have on there. But if you're looking purely to assign, then Jamf Pro does not have that exact thing. But I think it should be a feature request at this point.
Okay. Wait, that's it.
Sure, thanks. Hello.
Hi. I'd like to talk webhooks for a moment. So, full disclosure, my prod Jamf instance is still on 9.101. Yes, I know, I feel bad about it too, believe me. Part of the reason for that is because in some 10 dot something instance, the behavior of the computer added event changed.
Okay.
And no longer includes the information that we need to do our automated workflows that include whitelisting with Cisco ICE and all sorts of custom implementations that we had. It's a mess. Believe me, I hate it. But I guess my question is, a lot of the webhooks don't really provide a lot of information. A lot of the webhooks, when they fire, will give you information like, something changed, but they don't actually tell you what changed. So I'd like to know, is there any plan from Jamf to at least give the option in configuring a webhook to say, in addition to telling me something changed, please tell me what exactly changed, because I don't want to have to cache the last instance of whatever was in this, advanced search or whatever, and then pull it fresh and compare it. Or I don't want to have to, in our instance, what we have to do is we pull it down fresh when we get the webhook event, and then we mass update tens of thousands of records in Cisco ICE, because it's not really worth it for us to do anything other than that, because we're not getting all of the information that we need in the webhook other than something changed, figure it out.
Sure. I know that that technology is absolutely possible. Is Jamf planning to implement that? I don't see that currently on the roadmap. The information that you do need, you could potentially have, yes, the whole caching thing, it is data, so it could definitely take a lot of storage up. But once the webhook does trigger, you could send back another request to get more information. Now I know that right there is a lot, because you're going to have to parse through a lot and make sure whatever you need actually did take effect in the database and whatnot. But if it's not already a feature request, which it very well may be, I would see what we can do to get that.
Sure, thanks.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hello.
So I see that Jamf is still using username and passwords for APIs.
Yes.
All the cool kids are using API tokens. Is Jamf ever going to move in that direction?
The new API does have token off.
Thank you.
It was all me, by the way, all me. Any other questions? I think we have one more question coming on down. But yes, right now we have two APIs sitting side by side. We have a classic API and we have the new Jamf Pro API. Jamf Pro API has less things than the classic API, but it will eventually mimic. And then there'll be some sort of phased rollout of the classic API many, many years down the road. So don't worry about needing to break fix all your scripts. Hello.
Hi. So this will probably be put in a feature request.
Okay.
We're using a cloud-based help desk and asset management system that has a real nice API with it. What we want to be able to do is when new machines, new DEP machines show up because they've been shipped, they show up in the DEP, our DEP account in Jamf, we want to be able to read that and create a stub record in our asset management system that has the serial number and assigns an asset tag.
Sure.
Other than going and manually reading the database, I haven't found any way to actually get a hold of that DEP information via API or webhook.
Sure. Now, to my knowledge, I have not gone too deep into the new Jamf Pro API. However, there are brand new things in there. I'm going to actually pool the audience of these couple right in here. Do any of you three know anything about DEP in the new Jamf Pro API? Is there any manipulation that you can do or updating via API?
Just to clarify, are you talking about where you upload the DEP token and you see your device?
No, under pre-stage.
No, this is not even in a pre-stage.
Oh, okay.
This is in the DEP definition, when you do the token.
When you upload the token, you see your device.
Right, yeah, and then you can see the devices. So new devices show up there when they get shipped, the moment they get shipped. Yeah. I want to be able to pull that at midnight and see, are there any new devices, and pre-make my stub record in my asset management system.
I don't think it's there yet. I believe that is on the roadmap. either the pre-stage one or that one. One of those two is on the roadmap for the new API.
Okay, so again, the answer was
Everything I've just said.
it is not yet there. It is on the roadmap.
Okay.
Is this working? Yeah, sorry, just to repeat it, yeah, it's not on the roadmap, but that is something that's been requested, that many of us are looking for. Yeah, it is. Sorry, that it is on the roadmap, but it's also being pushed on. In general, that's something we'd all like to have. So that's absolutely been heard. Unfortunately, we can't write that solution right now because we're not engineers. And
Why not?
Yeah, I know, right? But it's been heard and I completely agreed with. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, engineer is in our title, but we're not software engineers.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Automate all the things.